Several lawmakers from Israel's center and right-wing political parties are publicly condemning Israel's decision to admit Erekat without at least formally requesting or perhaps even demanding that Hamas first return the Israeli civilian captives and the soldiers' bodies it's illegally holding. One lawmaker said it's neither moral nor logical to treat enemies without demanding reciprocal humanitarian demands from the Palestinians. Erekat for decades has been a prominent PLO administrator and executive and was one of the chief negotiators for the Oslo Accords in the early 90s. With me now to talk more about the issue of Erekat being treated at a Jerusalem hospital, David Ha'ivri, who is a Shomron councilman, and in studio with me, Yariv Oppenheimer, the project director of the two-state coalition. Thank you both for being with me. David, I'll start with you. Your thoughts in general on Israel accepting Erekat into Hadassah Hospital in Jerusalem without there being a request even from the Palestinians to offer some kind of gesture in return?
My biggest issue with this whole event is that the Palestinian Authority don't really deserve this assistance. I mean, the leaders of the Palestinian Authority who have mismanaged their government, the funding that they have received over 30 years, they could have used the international funding to establish hospitals to provide welfare for their people. But instead of that, they've embezzled the money. They've been funding terrorism. So I think that those leaders of the PLO do not deserve this VIP status, surely not for medical assistance. I don't mind Israel assisting Palestinian people with the technology and medical abilities of Israel. But the leadership itself of the PLO don't really deserve this special treatment.
Okay, Yariv, your response to that?
Yeah, the basic thing that the state has to do is to help a person that is in need and to save his life. This is the most moral thing that a state and a person should do without asking any question. So for me,
I totally
it's
agree
obvious that this is what we...
There are so many people in Israel and in the Palestinian Authority who do not have the VIP status of the PLO.
There are many... Just a second,
David, needing help. They're not being helped.
David,
this one individual
you have to...
opposes normalization with
please
Israel.
let me finish.
He's one of the biggest speakers against normalization with Israel. But when this man is sick, all of a sudden, opposing normalization is thrown aside.
No.
And we need to open the gates
First of all,
and allow this insider and save his life.
David, it's not about... It's not Erekat. It's first of all the moral values of the state of Israel. And you have someone...
I agree with you totally.
David, let me finish, please. And without getting into the question who is Erekat, first of all, we need to open the border and to bring the people here. Second, when you look at Erekat, David, enough. David, enough.
The reason
David, enough. I cannot finish a sentence. Enough. David, you are violent. This is violence.
All right,
David, with all due respect, I cannot continue.
Pay for
second, when you look who...
terrorists to kill Israelis. And for that reason, we have a security barrier that does not allow the Palestinians to enter Israeli hospitals.
All right, David, we need to let Yariv get his opinion expressed here as well. Just hang on 1 second for me, David. Yariv, go ahead.
Erekat is one of the leaders in the Palestinian side that was never accused of on any violent attempt against Israel. First, second, when he is speaking, no, enough. You are violent, David. You are violent because you are not letting me speak.
Violent?
Yeah, because you are not letting me speak. Please respect me, and you can react after. Second,
please go ahead.
Erekat. He is speaking out loud against violence, against terror, in favor of negotiation, and in favor of the two-state solution. David Ha'ivri is ready to speak about a Palestinian state? I doubt it. But Erekat is speaking out loud in favor of a Palestinian state next to Israel. Third, we are not in a balanced situation. We are not making a favor to the Palestinians. We are responsible to what is going on in the West Bank. If you want the Palestinians to have their own system, health system, give them a state with their own economy, and then they can have it.
But when you control
but when you occupy the Palestinians, you are not letting them having a state. You have responsibility over the people living there, including for their health.
Hey, let me jump in.
I'm going to jump
in here and ask something, Yariv, this is something David mentioned at the beginning here, that Saeb Erekat, he's one of the most powerful and important committee members of the executive. He's the executive committee secretary general, in fact. He's a very prominent Palestinian leader. Just weeks ago, the PLO denied the Palestinian people from getting medical equipment that the UAE delivered. The UAE was sending medical gear, medical equipment. But the plane landed at Tel Aviv, it landed at Ben Gurion. The Palestinian Authority refused to let this medical, life-saving equipment enter the Palestinian territories. The people couldn't get it. Now, Erekat gets coronavirus. Weeks later, he is allowed to go into Israel, to Hadassah, and get VIP treatment using really rare and expensive machines. It's not equitable.
I think it was a mistake by the Palestinian Authority to say that they are not ready to get assistance.
That's Erekat's mistake. This is the PLO denying.
Erekat is not, he's not the leader, he's not the
You see my point here.
I see your point, but in the Palestinians are in a lose-lose situation because just a second, the Palestinians are in lose-lose situation because when they are normalization with Israel, they are getting nothing. So what they have to do, if they don't want to act with terror, in order to gain the rights to have their own state. But if you look at the reality, Jeff, and if you will go to the hospitals, you will see all the time Palestinians there, not just because of coronavirus, but also because of cancer and other things. The cooperation between the people, the Israeli system, and the Palestinian people continue all the time. And let's be honest with ourselves, Israel is using these benefits in order to get information from Palestinians, in order to ask them some questions about security. It's not just, what we see as a humanitarian thing.
Okay,
we have our own interest, and we are using it while using the need of the Palestinians to get health care.
David, your response to perhaps this being a political and publicity opportunity for Israel, and the argument that it's just silly to ask Erekat or the PLO to extract any kind of concession from Hamas, which runs Gaza.
Have you asked a question? The question is, the main problem is the PLO. Before we start speaking about putting pressure on the Hamas, the PLO itself should stop its opposition to normalization with Israel. It's hypocritical for the leaders of the PLO and Saeb Erekat himself to be so opposed to normalization. But as soon as he doesn't feel well, then, put normalization aside, save my life.
David,
but what about all of the billions of Palestinians who are suffering?
doesn't have an hospital, a decent hospital, because of you. Saeb Erekat doesn't have a health system, a normal one, because of you, because it doesn't have a state.
No, he doesn't have a normal health system
to have
because
its
he
own
stole
state,
the money.
Believe me, he will never ask you any favor anymore. But you cannot control and occupy the West Bank and not be responsible to the health of the people living there. Decide.
Israel
if
has
it's
assisted
Israel,
the Palestinian Authority
if it's not
receiving
Israel,
international
so
aid
give
for
them a
3
state.
decades, and they have not built modern medicine facilities because they have embezzled the money.
I want to
Saeb
jump in.
Erekat is part of that infrastructure of thieves.
We're going to listen to a soundbite for our audience who may not be familiar a little bit with Saeb Erekat. Let's play a soundbite from a few years ago of Saeb Erekat back from 2016. Here is Mr. Erekat.
The PLO Executive Committee affirms that the essence of the conflict is the Israeli occupation, its crimes and constant aggressions, and the fact that for Israel, any attempt to equate the situations of the occupying power and of the Palestinian people under occupation is considered morally corrupt and a flagrant bias in favor of the occupation.
We hear Erekat there talking about how it's morally corrupt, the immorality of the occupation of the Israeli enterprise. So why would Erekat and the PLO let him go to Jerusalem? He himself and the PLO, they support a boycott. They don't want the aid, medical equipment, international medical equipment to go to the Palestinian people.
Because when we are talking about life and death, and he's
not the only one suffering from coronavirus and dying
believe
from
me
it.
that I think that the policy, I don't know what the policy of the Palestinians, I'm an Israeli. The policy of Israel should be that we are open our door to anyone that needs help in order to save his life. If he's a criminal or a terrorist, then you can judge him. And if he is not, of course, you should not, but you should open the door and you should save life. This is the moral thing. It's basic. I still amazed that we are making a discussion about it. But when you look into Erekat legacy,
provide
just a
humanitarian aid when Israel is able to provide humanitarian aid.
And we are not punishing.
Organization should not be the first on the list.
And I'm telling you about Erekat. That Erekat is an example to a moderate Palestinian leader that is looking at this conflict in a political view, and he thinks that we can have a political solution living side by side. If we are treating Erekat like he's Hamas or even worse than Hamas, so for us, all the Palestinians are bad. All the Palestinians are anti-Israelis. This is not realistic, and this is not the way to achieve the solution.
David, let me ask you a question, David. I mean, you mentioned that you don't, in principle, oppose Erekat being treated in Jerusalem at Hadassah, but he should be last on the list, not first. But he isn't. He's there now. That's the reality. And he requested from Israel, the paramedics and the security detail went to Jericho and brought him there. He got special permission. Are you saying that that should not have happened? Israel should have said no.
I am saying that there are many people in Israel and in the Palestinian Authority who are not leaders of the movement of anti-normalization, who are not inspiring thugs to harass Emirati visitors to the Temple Mount because of normalization.
And they are being denied health treatment? This is one.
Help. Israel should, in the medical system, there are waiting lists of people who are waiting.
Of people that has corona and they are dying and they need assistance? This is a lie. And you know that you are now lying. There is not even one Israeli that needs a bed that doesn't get it right now because he has corona and we need to save his life. This is a lie. So please don't lie.
Yariv, excuse me, is there one Palestinian who is not a political figure who is waiting and would rather be first on that list?
If he will call the Israeli side,
was not a politician.
If he will
against normalization.
If he will call to the Israeli side, so he should get treatment from Israel. You and I, we are not, David. No, I don't know before. It depends on his health condition.
No, that's the question.
It's not about. No, it's not about his. No, you see, you are not moral. You are not moral.
He is outspoken against normalization.
You would like to punish people
who are not outspoken against normalization and are dying.
You are not moral because you want to give priority to people not according to their health situation, but according to their views. And this is not a moral thing to do.
You are favoring a PLO leader over normal, regular Palestinian people.
I need to jump in here because we're out of time in this segment. I appreciate the debate. This is a topic that is front and center in Israeli discourse right now, the treatment of Saeb Erekat in Jerusalem and his current status. I appreciate this discussion. David and Yariv, gentlemen, both of you, thank you so much for taking part of it.